This Hangout is on air. Hangout on air is live. Let me start the recording here. Record the whole thing. Yeah, 1280 by 720. So it's going to record the entire screen here. All right, so we are recording the entire screen here. Excellent. All right, so let's switch screens here for a second. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. My name is Arun Gupta, and today we are recording 6th session of the Hanginar. With me today I have Axel Fontaine. Hello, Axel.
Hello, Arun. Pleased
Awesome. Yeah, same here, man. Excellent. So let me switch screens, go back to the browser. So we are talking about database migrations with Flyway. So far, we have learned about all different aspects of Java EE so far. Now, being continuous, Juke, modular applications, Hibernate OGM, domain-driven design. And again, today we are touching a very different aspect. If you have any particular speaker that you would like to engage, we have a few that are lined up already, and I'm going to start scheduling them. But if there's any particular topic that you would like to hear or listen to, by all means, file an issue here. So if I click on Axel here, there are people who have asked some questions over there. So that way you can suggest any speaker, and we'll get going with that. All right. So Axel, do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. All right. Well, I'm Axel Fontaine. I'm a founder and CEO of a company called Boxfuse here in Munich, and we're currently working on a product where we're going to put on market to shake up some things in the DevOps space. But I think today what we're interested in is my open source project, Flyway, which I started about 4.5 years ago. So it's something really that grew out of a bit of a pain I've had in my consulting career before that, and that is still very present in a lot of organizations today, is kind of having to deal with the realities of relational databases and the advantages they provide us of having a very nice dice and slice model for data where we can really deal with that very nicely. And the cost for that, for being able to dice and slice as we wish, is to have a structure that's defined at the database level, the schema, and this structure needs to evolve over time to accommodate new business requirements and to make sure that our app basically can keep on working with the new stuff we build. And so this evolution of the database schema has traditionally been something that has not been solved in an optimal way in most of the projects. It's always been associated with pain, and so people have refrained from doing it. And that's why, to a large extent, we also got the whole very complex mapping we got in Hibernate and all that as well. All these properties kind of arose from the fact that the database schema has traditionally been something very fixed. And so Flyway sets out to kind of eliminate those problems and make it as smooth as possible to evolve the database schema over time.
Awesome. So is it only like this is a Java EE Hanginar series, but does that mean this Flyway can only be used in Java EE applications, or is it cross-platform, or is it Java agnostic, or is it language agnostic as well?
Well, Flyway itself is written in Java, so the primary platform is the JVM, but it is from an end user perspective, you can run it from a number of clients. So the way I advocate is to actually integrate it as a library directly in your application. So then it's just a jar file you would add through Maven or whatever build tool you have and just include it there. But you're in no way limited by that. So you can use it as a plugin for whatever build tool you favor, whether it's Ant, Maven, Gradle, SVT, whatever you want to use in the JVM space, or there is a standalone command line client as well. So that's very useful for machines where you may not have a build tool installed, or if you want to pass it to a DBA and they're able to quickly execute some commands from a shell somewhere. So you get different ways to use it, but yeah, the historical lineage is on the JVM, and that's certainly the platform that's supported the best.
Okay, awesome. So okay, I understand you have very few slides, which provides a background of Flyway. And then these Hanginars are anyway code intensive. So let's go through the slides and then jump into the code. Yeah?
Sure, I'll bring him up. All right. Can you see the slides? No, probably not. I'll need to share my screen.
That is correct.
There we go.
It would be fun if the computers, they can start recognizing.
Yeah.
Yeah, you know what? Actually, if you don't mind, unsharing your screen once again.
Sure, no problem. There we go. Stop sharing it.
Yeah. So one thing I want to say, this is what you and I were joking. We are conference junkies. The idea of this Flyway came up on the Java Zone cruise that we did last year. You were doing pull-ups, I was doing pull-ups, and I said, you know what? I don't know what struck in our mind. Hey, let's do a Flyway Hanginar. So that's pretty cool. And now you and I recognize, hey, we're both wearing our JFocus hoodies. So very comfortable, conference junkies. So hopefully this, as we do give Flyway more visibility, more conference organizers will start understanding the importance of it and approving it as a topic as well.
Well, I think it's certainly been already widely approved. There's already been a fair number of events that either spoke specifically about it or where it's been mentioned. And there was a bit of a joke going on at the last Java 1 where somebody said, is there some kind of conspiracy going on? Because it was a full talk they'd been into where Flyway had been mentioned as their preferred solution to tackle this problem. So there is a bit of presence, but yeah, the more the better.
Yeah, awesome. Okay, all right, let's get started. Then talk about database migrations made easy. Yeah, I can see the slides.
Okay, perfect. So today we're going to talk here a bit about Flyway. The little headline says it all: database migrations made easy. So let's have a look at what that means. What I've got here is just a little bit of a sample UI for a very simple app, and this app is accessing a database. So basically, we've got our two input fields there, and they map onto two columns of an account table in this case, and our name and our email, and that's all nice and well until someday a new requirement arises. And so in this case, this could be, for example, that we now need to store the age of that person as well, and so if we are in relational database world, we will have to evolve the structure of our table to accommodate an age column as well, so that our code that expects to read and write from it will have a place to do so. Now, how has this traditionally been solved? Well, the first solution to this is simply just to do it by hand. We'll just issue an alter table using whatever tools we have from our database. In this case here, I've got a screenshot of the UI of SQL Server, but this could be SQL Plus for Oracle or whatever one chooses to use to do that. It's just a one-off command, and you get it done. And that's actually not too bad. It certainly works with a single database instance. It works very well. But the problem is that what we see here is never really the reality on most, but the simplest.
Well, actually, if you take a break now, even in that command, so effectively you are coordinating your application deployment and database migration. Now you have to tell two people or one person that issue these two commands together, and that's when the app would work. So these are two separate, either documentation or scripts that need to run.
I think that's a very good point, Arun. And not only do they have to be done together, but they're usually done together either at 5 in the morning or on a Saturday night.
Right.
So that brings a whole bunch of trouble. So
right.
Certainly the necessary synchronization between the DBA and whoever's doing deployment of the app. Absolutely.
Right.
And so our app, in this example here, we've got our app, and our database is on most of the projects, except the simplest ones, looks actually more like this, where we actually have to deal with multiple developer machines. We have multiple environments where this is installed and deployed. And so it's not just the one database that has to be kept in sync with the software. It's actually many databases. Just as an example, on a simple project, if let's assume you have a team of 5 developers, and each developer has two databases. One database just for unit tests and automated testing that is being recreated all the time, and another one for manual testing where you may build up some data set as you go along. So that's 10 databases already just for these 5 developers. And if you add a CI environment, a test environment, and a production environment, that's already 13 databases that have to be kept in sync. So it's quite a delicate process to make sure that all works. And that's why just issuing manual commands is usually not the best solution to do all this reliably. So the next step, what people do if they say, okay, well, manual commands don't cut it, we see that, then we start doing scripting. So we basically fold all these commands into a .SQL file, and we execute it using whatever automated tool we have to run it against the database in one go. So in this example here, I've listed the command for SQL Plus from Oracle, just to kind of pass in the whole file with all the commands, and it executes it at once. So at least we don't have to type every single command separately for every database instance. But we're not out of the wood just yet, because if we look over time, our database changes. Well, we won't just have one. After a while, we'll have the question. Okay, well, it's all nice and well, but if I've got this change over here, this database over there, has it already been applied? How do I know that these changes have already been executed, that these statements have run, that these objects are present? And the problem, of course, increases as time goes on, because we won't just have one change set over time. We'll have multiple change sets as the project evolves. And so there again, the next question is, in what order do these need to be applied? Because I can't really rename a column before I've created the table that contains it. So there again, I have another question to solve, and so this is basically what Flyway sets out to do, is to offer answers to these two questions so that this process can be tackled in a reliable way.
So this is very much like writing a Java EE application or Java application, that the multiple people who are collaborating on the application. Generally, developers tend to think it from the application code perspective, without thinking and saying, hey, database administration is DBA's job, but effectively they should really think of it, application and database migrations, as one concept.
Well, I'm glad you brought that up. Certainly, the fact thinking about it from a code perspective, because I'm a big fan of a contract first type of approach when it comes to talking between systems, and in this case here, when we talk to the database, I'm a big fan of contract first as well, which for me is the database schema. So that's the contract to the outside world for the database, and that's the thing that has to be managed first, and the code has to be adapted for that, and not the other way around. So that's why I think certainly this needs to move more front and center to have a reliable process there.
Right. Okay.
Okay. So just a little bit about Flyway. So as I said, by now whoever's getting started is certainly not an early adopter anymore. So Flyway is now 4.5 years old, and there were 250,000 downloads in 2014, but half of those in Q4 alone. So it's still growing very fast, and all the basic problems have been ironed out, so it's very stable at this point in time. It got recommended by ThoughtWorks as well in their latest technology radar. They moved it to the adopt section, and we're quite fond of it, so that was very nice as well. But let's dive into how it works. So behind the scenes, so we've seen the problems we're trying to solve. So we've got our database schema here, and at some point it will have to evolve. And so to be able to keep track of what's already been applied and what still needs to happen, Flyway creates a special table in the database, which by default is called schema_version. And what this really is it's a bookkeeping table for Flyway, just to keep track of what's already been applied when, and whether it was successful or not. So in this example here, if we apply a first migration, which we see our little blue tables there being created in our database, Flyway will record that in the schema version table as being applied. It will, based on some naming conventions for the script, we can see here that the script has a name v1 underscore something something. So that's the default naming convention, and Flyway is able to extract a bunch of information out of that. So it will automatically extract the version number of that script, the description. It knows that it's a SQL script, and can then tell that it was installed on that date and executed in that many milliseconds, and it was successful. And when we're ready to migrate to the next version, again, we can query the database. We know that we've already migrated to version 1, so we now only have to migrate to version 2, and the same type of logic applies. So to be able to find where these scripts are, Flyway as a scanner for the file system and for the class part, so it's able to basically load up all these scripts dynamically without having to configure them individually, and it will then sort them by version number and just apply them in order, whatever just needs to be done. So that's the typical workflow you would have.
So these SQL scripts are standard scripts, no additional metadata is required in them.
That's correct. So the whole idea is that there would be as little lock-in as possible on the one hand, so that the minute you're not satisfied with Flyway as a solution for you, you're able to move on without having to adapt all your scripts again for something else. And the other, of course, is that you can then use the full power of your database, because if you're going to have a big investment in Oracle or in or even just in MySQL or Postgres, you might as well use the full power available, whether it's partial indexes on Postgres or special tuning options on Oracle. So it's always interesting to be able to leverage that, and just having the full power of the raw SQL available lets you do that in a very convenient way. And you, of course, have access to all your classic tools as well, which will provide you completion and all these tools that are aware of the specific database dialects.
So, and the name of these files are independent, or they have a certain naming scheme to them?
So that's correct. There is a naming scheme. So Flyway favors convention over configuration, and so but it is configurable. By default, the naming scheme is a capital V followed by a version number, which can be written in a dotted notation, so 1.2.3.4, however you want, followed by 2 underscores, and then a description followed by .SQL. But all these parts are configurable. These are just the default, so if you do not want to configure anything, you can just start with those and it'll work out of the box.
Now, in my Java EE land, I might be a JPA programmer. I don't know how my SQL scripts look like. I might have designed my entity using JPA, which are Java classes. How do I, there are no SQL scripts to deal with. How do I work in that case?
Well, I think it's a fair point. It brings us back to the whole contract versus code first approach. So I think certainly if you start by designing your entities, you've adopted a code first approach, and you kind of need to reverse engineer the contract with your database from that. There are tools that can help you with that. I think the classic is the HBM to DDL from Hibernate land, which certainly lets you go from your entities and generate some DDL out of that. It's a tool that's in use in development in a lot of shops. But it kind of breaks down after a while because it's not aware of some subtle changes. It's not aware of renames and other problems. So it is something that you can use as a help to get started. But then once you've gotten all that going, then it's probably time to move to a more dedicated solution like Flyway to then handle that in the future. But there is certainly the whole thing is starting from your entities the right approach or not. I would like to question it, but that's just my personal point of view.
Okay. So the key point is for database migrations using Flyway, the entry point is always an SQL.
It is, let's not say always. So in most of the cases, the vast majority of the cases, SQL is what you want.
Sure.
Flyway does offer you a few more possibilities. You can write migrations in Java as well for more complex things. This is quite useful if you're dealing with certain things that the SQL language is not able to do well for you. So I'm thinking about blobs or just complex data transformations where you kind of reach the limits of the expressiveness of SQL, and there you can just revert to Java to help you with there. But sure, they in the vast majority of the cases, it's a SQL first approach.
Right. Well, even in JPA, for example, in JPA 2.1, capability was added where you could take a JPA entity, generate a SQL file from it, but that generates a full-blown SQL. So I guess the developer will have to figure out what is the delta and then use that as the base script for database migration.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct. And the by having the developer taking care of that already, he or she is able to test that on their own machine already and make sure that works. And once it's being checked in, then all the other developers do get this change automatically through version control. So it's something that's then very well tested before it gets to production. And we've seen our little flow with our different systems and the different machines, and so these migrations will then run identically everywhere. We've got an absolute guarantee of that. So so that certainly helps. But yes, I would say this is the flow. You have to then diff your existing structure versus the last one that was in the database, and then create the migration script for that.
So this is like a migration forward. How do you do migration backward?
Well, if you look at it from a database perspective, there is really no such thing as migrating backwards. You may issue a forward migration that compensates for the changes being done in the previous one. But you don't really have the concept of going back, besides, of course, a transaction and a rollback. So that, of course, is the first thing Flyway does. When it runs a migration, it will wrap the whole migration script in a transaction. And if your database supports DDL transactions like DB2 or SQL Server or Postgres, then you're in luck, because if any of these statements fail, the whole thing will simply get rolled back.
Well, the scenario I was coming at is, so let's say I deployed a new version of the application, let's say version 2, and the application is not performing well, and that actually came along with the database schema migration. So I want to roll back to version 1, but that means I need to roll back to database version 1 as well. How would that scenario be supported?
I think there's two answers to that question. I think that the first one is you could issue a version 3 that will undo the changes that happened between version 1 and version 2, which is really what you need to do anyway at that point in time, if that's what you've run into. There are a number of challenges with that. We'll call them that way. The first one is that if you've done any destructive changes on your way from version 1 to version 2, it becomes more difficult to undo those. A destructive change could also simply be modifying data, where you would have to then start keeping track of the old state of the data and being able to restore it. But it could also be dropping an entire column or a table or something else.
Okay, I get it. All right, keep going. This is good. This is really good so far.
That's the first. So that's the first challenge. But what I really recommend here is to write your database migrations in a backward compatible way with the last version in production you would like to roll back to. This takes a little bit more effort upfront, but you do have the benefit later on when you actually roll the code out and you migrate the database that if something doesn't work with version 2, version 1 will keep on running with the new version of the database. So that's a very, very nice nice thing to have. It sounds a little bit complicated, but it really isn't. It's just a little bit more preparation
Right.
beforehand.
Got it. Okay.
All right, so that was all for the slide part. So so
Awesome.
I've prepared a little demo. So I
Okay.
would say let's maybe have a look at that so we can get a feel of how it all works in practice.
Sounds good.
Let me just switch to IntelliJ, which should be right here. Okay, so I've got a very simple application. I've actually got it up and running already. So let me just pull that up. I'm just gonna pull this on this screen. So this is our little application I've made for our Hanginar here. It's just basically a one-page thingy that shows us the state of the different migrations. It's got a person table, and we can add some data into that. So very simple thing. And if we look at it from a code perspective, what we have is we have one entity that has an ID and a name, and we have two migrations to get started. They're right here, just one that will create a table to support that entity. So it has two columns with an ID and a name. I'm using Postgres here. That's the specific syntax we've got here. And a second one which adds basically some records. So this could be, for example, some reference data you keep in the database or whatever you have there. So Flyway doesn't really distinguish between DDL or DML. It just executes whatever statements you throw at it. And so in this case here, I've got some DML in version 1.1 and some DDL in version 1.
Yeah, I was about to ask that because from Flyway perspective, it's just a SQL statement. Now, as long as the database recognizes it as a valid SQL statement, it'll just run it.
That's correct. Yes, Flyway doesn't make any judgment as to what you're allowed to execute or not. It'll just take whatever you throw at it and execute it for you against the database.
So effectively, it connects with the database using a JDBC URL, and that's it.
That's correct. So let's have a look at that. I'm just gonna bring up here. I've got a console here as well, and so I've got Flyway running as a command line tool as well. So the first interesting command is Flyway info, and what that does is really querying the database to see in which state it's in. So it's when we had our little diagram before, it's basically to answer the question mark above the database. In what state is it, whether has already been applied or not. And so if we saw our two little scripts we had there, where we had our v1 initial structure and our v11 populate table, if we issue a flyway.info here, we can see that the naming convention has been recognized and has been passed into different versions and descriptions, and the state by default is pending, meaning it's not been applied yet. So if
now,
we look at our database,
back in your application, where did you specify exactly the JDBC URL?
We're going to have a look at that in a second from the database perspective. So from the application perspective, I just want to show the database first to kind of see. So here it is. So we've got a schema public, and on Postgres that's the default schema, and it's totally empty at this point in time. So there are no objects. From an application, so let's have a look at from an application perspective as well, because you asked then. So let's have a quick look there. So in this case here, to find, I've attached Flyway in a number of ways to our database. So the way I recommend it on most projects is to have it on application startup, so that when your application starts, no matter where it is able to then put the database in an appropriate state, so that JPA or whatever framework you use on top of that is then able to read and write to the structures it expects to be there, so that your entities do have the tables and the columns to back them up. And so to do that, you just have to start it somewhere on application startup. In this case here, I've just used a web listener from the servlet, but this could be a bean on starting on startup as well. That's doesn't make a big difference. The way you configure it is basically just on most applications, just 3 lines. So it's you initialize the Flyway object, you pass it a data source, which could be either a data source object you've retrieved through JNDI or some other way, or just like in this case here, you can pass it a JDBC URL, a username, and a password, and it'll create an internal data source for you. But that's whatever is most convenient for your environment. That doesn't make a big difference. And then,
So, have you thought about, I mean, like typically in the Java EE land, we expect the users to be able to inject a resource. So, I mean, for example, here I could see, well, a couple of points here. First of all, instead of specifying the set data source here, I was thinking my JDBC resource is already specified in persistence.xml. So why not repurpose that? One. Second is, instead of saying Flyway new Flyway, I would say, well, just inject Flyway. It'll give me a Flyway instance, and then it'll automatically figure out, oh, this is the JDBC resource you care, so I'll automatically pick up that JDBC resource. So effectively, these lines from 11 to 15 can go away, and I could just say add inject Flyway, and then Flyway.migrate.
yes, absolutely. That works as well. Yeah.
Oh, awesome. Oh, perfect. Okay, cool. I was doing too much talking.
No problem. No, you're absolutely right. So Flyway is not opinionated about how you instantiate it. It's whatever suits your project best, and absolutely you can use dependency injection to take care of that as well.
Lovely. Okay, because I think that would be a more recommended and approachable model, and easy to explain as well for the Java EE developer. Specifically, that's how we are promoting CDI to be used all across the platform. So instead of, so in this case, for example, you're specifying the JDBC URL, username, password. All of that is typically sitting way down in your stack, like either in persistence.xml or maybe using password aliases, etc. So you can just repurpose that information. And that also goes back to your dry principle as well.
Yes, I agree. I agree with you. So
Okay.
certainly.
Okay.
So we've seen here that there is actually very little configuration going on, and that's because of the convention over configuration approach that's being taken there. So by default, Flyway will look on the class path in the package called db.migration for the different migrations it can find. So in our case here, it's a Maven project I've set up with source main resources, and there under db.migration, it has these 2 files here. And so when this will run, it will then analyze all this. It'll find these 2 files. It'll look at the file name structure, extract the versions, sort them by version, look at what's been applied already, and then basically apply what's missing. So that's what migrate does in that case. So I would say let's have a look at that in just a second. I think the other thing that's interesting is even though at runtime you want Flyway to migrate your database on application startup, it is also very useful in development to be able to issue, like we did there, Flyway info from the command line or some other command you would like to execute. But and to do that, you can rely on build tool plugins. So in this case here, I've got a Maven project, and this is the Maven plugin for Flyway that basically uses the same structure as you would have there as well. So again, if you want this located in some central place, you can have it in some property file and just kind of reuse those properties as well. So that works too. But the idea is the same. You give it some very basic configuration, and it's able to run from there on the same conventions. All right, so let's have a look at that. I'm going to start the application, and we'll have a look at how that works. Now, just a second. Start it. So I'm going to switch.
What application server are you using in this case?
This is just a simple Tomcat I'm
Oh, Tomcat.
using there, but it's application server agnostic.
Okay. Because this is basically a WAR file, so it could be deployed
Correct.
on any.
It's a standard
okay.
WAR file that could run on JBoss. It could run on anything you want to throw it at.
Okay.
And so here, what happened is now that that we've run it, we've actually found these two files and we've executed them, and this is just a result of the query here in the table. So let's go back to our database to see what happened on that side. So if I switch back to the database here and refresh my my public schema, just quickly gonna generate a diagram from it. We now see that we have two tables that that came up there. We have the schema version table that was created by Flyway, which we saw in the slides also, which is our bookkeeping table for that, and we've got our person table, and we've got some interesting data in both of these tables. So the schema version table, if we have a look at it first, we see that we now have two rows that appeared in here for our different migrations, where we've got version 1.1 and 1.1 with our different scripts, and they were both run successfully.
Nice.
If you look at our person table, this is basically the result of our version 1.1 script that populated, in this case, our reference data with Arun and Axel there. So that's just a very simple thing there. I think one very useful thing in development for this, we already talked about, well, and then the developer kind of goes and writes the scripts, and it's easy to make a mistake at some point when you make that, and then you end up with a database in a state that you don't really want to have. And so to be able to do that, Flyway offers you a very convenient command, which you should never run on your production system, or you'll only be able to run it once. Let's do it this way. Let's say it this way. It's Flyway clean. So I'm using the Maven plugin here for that. And so what clean does is basically it connects with your database, and we'll wipe it completely clean. So this is very useful in development. If we go back and have a look at our database here now, everything's gone. So there's nothing left in the schema. We've really got a blank slate again, and then it's if we've now fixed our migrations and we're ready to go again, all we have to do is call Flyway migrate again, bang, and we're back. So if I go back to the database, the tables are back. So that's a very quick and convenient way to be able to recreate a database from scratch or create it on a new developer's machine, for example. That's just very, very fast. So the need to roll back in development is almost gone with a way of working like this, because it's just bang and you've recreated it anyway.
Right. I think the coolest part to me is whether it's application or database, which is what we were talking earlier, both of those are deployed together as one unit, and that ensures that there is a consistency. You know exactly what's getting deployed instead of running them as two parallel scripts by two different people in two different departments.
I couldn't agree more. I think for me the central question to ask yourself, and when you're deploying something, is what is the life cycle of this thing? And in all modern applications, the database schema is a life cycle that is very tightly coupled to the life cycle of the application itself. And we've seen it with our JPA entities who may gain another column mapping, and so this needs to be present in the database as well. So that's quite important to kind of maintain it. And so why would we risk having these things not fit together at runtime? And so I couldn't agree more. Let's not take any risk there. Let's just keep them together and deploy the database changes together with the application.
Right. And that also blends very well with the whole DevOps mindset, where you're saying, dev and ops need to work with each other. So you can generate SQL. The database guys can give you the finely tuned SQL scripts. So the way I'm thinking the flow for Java EE developer is, You start with the JP entity, you generate the SQL scripts, you give it to the DBA, DBA will fine tune it, then you get those SQL scripts back, then you put them in your db.migration source main resources, and then you say go deploy the application, and it's going to do the entire deployment, migration, all of that for you.
I think that's a very good point. I think you mentioned it right, that the DBA still has an important role to play there, but it's earlier in the food chain. Basically, it's during development and not at deployment time that the DBA is now involved in the process, so that you can then rely on the expertise of the DBA as you're creating these migration scripts, and you can get input early. And once you're both satisfied with the result, you can then fold it into the application, and it'll then be rolled out automatically on the next deployment. So that's certainly a big point there, and it's a big ease for actually getting the stuff out there. And we already mentioned the coordination between the DBA and whoever's deploying the app. That doesn't need to happen anymore at that specific point in time. And the next thing, of course, is that you now have an application, whether it's an EAR file or a WAR file, that you can throw at any environment, and it will kind of detect in what state the database is and bring it up to the state it requires automatically for you. And it doesn't matter if your development environment is at version 6 and your production environment is at version 2. If you throw it version 10, it will automatically, in development, migrate it to 7, 8, 9, and 10. And if you throw the same EAR file at your production environment, it will go from 2 to 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. And so you don't have to worry about that part anymore.
Right. Because of that magic schema version table that is already maintained by Flyway, it maintains what is the current version that has been applied, and then what subsequent migrations need to be applied, and then accordingly it looks through your DB migration directory and apply them.
Absolutely. Yes.
Okay, fantastic. Now, another aspect that you talked about earlier was doing code migrations using Java code.
Yes, I've got one example right here. So as I said, this is really this is not the first choice. This should be your second choice if you've reached the limits of SQL. And so the limits of SQL are very apparent when dealing with large objects or with more complex processing. And so I've prepared a little Java-based migration here. I'm just gonna let's get rid of these guys here. And what it does is basically it uses the JDBC API by default, but you can use whatever abstraction you want there. And you're being handed a connection, so you implement a simple interface called JDBC migration that has one method that you must implement, and you get handed a database connection. You can then use whatever tool you wish to wrap this database connection if you don't want to work with plain JDBC. For this example here, I've just used plain JDBC, and what I'm doing here is, for example, I'm doing a little bit of string processing where we're not happy with the one column where we have a name. We want to split it with first name and last name column at some point, and so to do that, we need to read the existing values and kind of do a bit of a split here to make sure that works. So this is just a bit of an example. It could be normalizing phone numbers. It could be whatever you have to do to process your data, where you had it unstructured first maybe, and you want to bring some structure in later. So this is just all plain JDBC, but as I said, you can use whatever language whatever abstraction you wish to use there, as long as you can pass it a connection.
So what is the order? Like now I have V1, V11, and now V2 in this DB disabled directory. So what is the order in which the migrations are applied now?
So this DB disabled directory is just a little help I've got there. So I could prepare the migration before, and it wouldn't be detected by Flyway, so to speak. So if I now copy it to, or if I move it to the DB migration package, which I've just done, it will be seen by Flyway, and what will happen there is that the same ordering as you would normally expect would take place. So it will simply look at the class name. By default, it applies the same convention. You can implement some other interfaces to allow you to override it, but by default it applies the same convention as for the SQL files. And so in this case here, it will find that it's version 2, and it will find split names as a description. So we can have a look at that. Now that I've copied it, I'm just going to switch back to my console here and just issue a Flyway info as well from Maven, just so you can see what it looks like. So here we are. So you've seen that our existing migrations, the two that we ran when our application started, are still successful, and we've now detected a third one, which is simply in state pending. So it just merged everything together.
Nice, nice, very fancy. Okay, so this is very, very useful actually. Very, very useful.
Yes, and it's the whole idea is that once you've set up Flyway and you've integrated it with your application, you never have to worry about it again. You just keep on dropping more migration files or classes in the packages you've configured, or in this case the default, and that's it. You will never have to actively deal with it again. So if we simply restart our application now, so I'm just gonna restart this guy here, and we'll have a look at the logs when it starts. Let me just hold on. Where is my? There you go. Or maybe they're turned off. It doesn't matter. I'm just going to switch to our app here, reload here, and we now see that we've executed a third migration of type JDBC that's been run successfully. So our entity doesn't really match the structure anymore. So that's why this display here is a bit strange. So of course, if the structure of the database changes, we have to adjust our entities. So let's have a look at that. I'm just going to quickly change this guy because the name column disappeared. So we now have a first name column and a last name column that we have there. So I'm just going to eliminate this and generate some getters and setters for these two. So JPA is very easy. We'll just do that, and I've got my little guy here who's retrieving the data. So I'm just gonna quickly say that actually for retrieving it's already done. So there it's just being serialized automatically. So so let's just restart now. Come on. There we go. And now JPA found the correct mapping, and we can see that basically our columns are.
Very nice. Very nice.
So it's actually a very quick thing. Even if you don't start with your entities, but you actually start with your database migration scripts, due to the convenience of JPA and its reliance also on convention over configuration, you can integrate the two very nicely. That's a very quick thing there.
Lovely, lovely. So anything else you want to show off, or can I switch to the Hanginar issue and look at what questions were being asked?
No, I would say let's go through the questions.
Okay, let's do that, man. So here we are. So how do developers do DB migrations without Flyway? You already answered that. Getting started samples. No, where would you? Well, I need to share my screen for that. So that you can see it as well. Okay, here we go. So are there any getting started samples that people can look at? So if you can walk through, the recording, there is no more space. Oh dear, recording has been stopped. Okay, hold on, give me a second. Stop the recording. Yeah, I've been running way too many containers recently. So let's go here. Running low on disk space, I get it. Well, how much is it? 681 megabytes. Oh dear. Okay, I need to. Give me a second. I'm gonna clean some of the things. Not this guy here. Boot to Docker. Where is my boot to? Oh wow, it's not even showing my applications anymore. It's freaking out completely. Hmm. The recording has stopped, so that's not a good thing.
Okay.
Um, it's not even showing my boot to Docker VM. So let me try again. Oh, there you go. Okay, it started boot to Docker. I gotta shut down some of my containers that are running over there.
Fair enough.
That's what is eating probably. Oh wow, got hundreds of containers running here. Let me kill all these guys here. I don't need them right now. Okay, so that goes away. Okay, no more containers running here, so that's good. And then I am gonna clean up some of my virtual box images. Okay, those are gone as well. Okay, so let's take a look at it now. Okay, let me go to trash. This is a what 500 gigabyte drive. Okay, so that's gone as well. Okay, let's try it again. Okay, that's speed of 5.1 gigabytes. So we have at least space to continue at least now. Um, so what I'm going to do is go to the far end, and we were talking about the issues. Okay, so let me start the recording again, and
Sure.
we'll go back to the issues. All right, back with the recording. So we were talking about getting started samples. So if you can show me how would developers get started with it?
Absolutely. So I think the easiest way for that is to go to the Flyway website, flywaydb.org, and just click the big fat button, the first one there that springs at you, and that will take you to the whole getting started section. And then depending on however you want to run Flyway, you can just pick what you want. So if you want to run it with the API, it'll walk you through setting it up as adding the dependency and the dependency for your database and configuring it and just having a first couple of migrations running for you and kind of developing a feel for that. So that's really just a 5 minute getting started thing for whatever you want. So if you want to start with the command line instead, it'll walk you through all the detailed steps of having it up and running. So everything's been written really with a 5 minute to success goal in mind when you do these getting started
Okay.
tutorials. And as you reach the end of it, then you can then dive deeper in the documentation and get familiar with the different concepts and kind of look at what's working for you there. Look at the database you're wishing to use it with, the supported features, the limitations, and so on.
Okay. All right. All right. Very cool. Let's go back to the browser again. We talked about JPA. Any comparisons with Liquibase?
This is actually the question I get the most often, and I think there's some clear differences. I think the first one is that Liquibase offers you an abstraction over your database. So by default, they do have some XML-based format for all your change sets where you describe in some kind of XML-based DSL what is supposed to happen. So creating this table, renaming that, and they will then at runtime translate it for the DDL that is specific to your database. So this is very useful if you have to work on a project where you need to deal with both DB2, SQL Server, Oracle, and you need to abstract all that away. So that's a very nice thing there. But in practice, most of the projects don't need that. So if you can live without that, then I think the simplicity of Flyway of having just 6 basic commands you work with and a simple mental model may be a better fit for you. So it's a bit of at the end choosing the simplest tool that works for you on your project. I think Liquibase has some additional features as well, which are quite nice, where they allow you to diff an existing database with what you currently have in your change set XML. So they have some things on that side. So I would say it's really picking the simplest tool that does the job for you and wherever you feel happy. But I think the main point is it doesn't really matter whether you're using Flyway or Liquibase. You should use a tool to solve this problem. I think that's already the biggest step forward, more than the specific tool. I, of course, strongly believe in Flyway being the right solution for this, but I think the main point is any tool is better than no tool.
Right. Agreed. No, I think that's a very positive approach. I like that. In terms of IDE support, there is nothing that the IDEs need to support it, right?
Well, the IDEs do give you some help. If we look here at IntelliJ, for example, where you do have all the standard completion that it offers you for all the for your database specific dialect, so you can set the dialect for the file you're editing to whatever database you wish to use, and then you do have nice completion for standard SQL, and IntelliJ is quite clever for that. But beyond that, no, there is no Flyway specific thing an IDE would need to support.
Right. That's what I thought. Okay, very cool. Now moving on, this is a question by Javor Nikolov. With changes of a DB sub-object scattered in multiple migration files, it might get hard to collect the bigger picture, the whole current state of the object and of the schema as a whole. How do we keep clarity on the big picture?
I think we already saw that right here. And so I think for me the best way to have the clarity there is to generate a diagram out of your database. This can be done here just with one click in IntelliJ, and then you do have a very good overview of what your schema structure looks at this point in time with all the changes applied and as it currently is. So right. I would definitely recommend going that way.
Right. So this basically takes into consideration all the migrations, etc., that has been done so far.
Absolutely. It just reflects the current state, and IntelliJ is not a requirement there. There's DB Visualizer. There's a bunch of nice tools on the market that very quickly lets you reverse engineer your schema and generate some very nice diagram from it.
Okay. Another question which we talked about earlier is reverting database schema changes.
Yes. So as I said, and there it's a bit of a red herring because from a database perspective, there's no such thing as really rolling something back. So it's just if it's within a transaction, no problem. It's wrapped if it's within a migration, it's wrapped in a transaction if your database supports CDL transactions. But if you really want to roll back, let's say from version 5 to version 2, there is no magic involved. You will have to issue compensating migrations for those. So that's really the same as you would write in down migrations with other tools. So you just write it then when you need it. But be aware of all the pitfalls of having to deal with destructive changes, and some things might not be able to be rolled back. So there are different possibilities. Again, writing your migrations in a backwards compatible way, or if you do have snapshot technology for your storage layer beneath your database, that may be a way to quickly restore a previous state as well. Needs to be investigated depending on whatever performance you're able to get out of that.
Okay, very, very reasonable. Another question here is, at install time is selected with which modules to install, later may install the skipped ones. Module is subset of migrations. So depending upon the environment, order of applying migrations might be different. Any hints for such scenarios?
So I would say in this case where that person is describing a modular application, and let's say for customer A, we've activated modules A, B, and C, and for customer B, we've activated the modules A, D, and E, for example. It doesn't really hurt to apply the migrations for old modules, and then you would simply have some structures that lay dormant until you actually activate the code that exercises them. So that's always a possibility. If for some reason that doesn't work for you, you do have a flag in Flyway that you can activate, which is called out of order, which lets you basically execute version 2 after you've run version 3. So that's a possibility, but I would absolutely see that as a second choice. I think the first choice should just be deploy your whole database identically everywhere and just leave some structures dormant until you activate the code that exercises them.
Yeah, I think that's the approach that is taken by other applications I have seen. I mean, you have the entire software delivered to you. Depending upon the license key that you purchase, they enable and disable the features.
Correct.
Seems like a reasonable approach. All right. Another one. How do you add index on big table on database running in production without blocking deployment pipeline?
Well, I think there is no magic here. Depending on the database you're using, adding an index to a large table could or could not be an issue. For certain better database systems like Postgres, it's less of an issue. If you're on MySQL, you're in big trouble. And so, sort of way to deal with that is to look at alternatives. So MySQL, for example, has the concept of atomic renames. So what you can do is basically create a second table, migrate the table in the background, so only that table gets blocked. And as the migration completes, you do a switch atomically of the old and the new table that will take care of that for you. So that's one possibility. But if that is not an option either, if that is still putting too much load on your system, another option is to have a read-only mode for your application and simply have another copy of the entire database being migrated offline and then switching the roles of the databases before you put the next version of the application live and back into read-write mode. So that's a possibility there as well. But all these really are just backup plans in case your database system that doesn't help you with just a straightforward scenario. And the databases are getting better with every single version at being able to perform larger and larger changes online without blocking.
Yeah. Well, you know what? My recording stopped again.
Okay.
Why is it running out again? We just cleaned up the space. Is it already eaten? Wow.
Ooh, that's incredible.
That's a fast recording, man. That's eating up like it is like 10 minutes of recording has eaten up like what, 5 gigabyte of space? What, 4.5 gigabyte?
Oh man.
Wow, that's ridiculous.
Insane.
Okay. Well, we have one more question remaining, and there is no wrap up. Dear, let's see. What can I get rid of? Oh my God, this is down to the wires, man. Sorry about that.
No worries.
Size. What is this guy here? Okay, get rid of you guys.
Look at that. Your DVD from Windows.
Yeah. Well, I got to keep that one. I can get rid of this Fedora Live desktop. I don't need that. I can get rid of that. This can go away. These are not big monsters anyway.
No, that's about 100 megs each. I think these zip files from.
Well, I think the zip file itself, the VMDK is what, 10 gigabytes. So that should hopefully allow us to wrap up the webinar now. Okay.
Perfect.
12 gigabyte. Okay. So maybe another 5 gigabytes will be gone by the time we finish up. Wow, that's crazy. Let's discuss this last question and then we can wrap up.
Sure.
All right, so back to the recording again after cleaning up Drive. The last question here is, well, we talked about migration rollbacks, and we've discussed that several times. So I'm going to jump to the last question. Common case scenarios of Flyway for testing environment.
I think here as well, and where Flyway really helps you is just to have the structure of your database for your testing environment set up very quickly. But you can also use it to populate it some test data you want over and over again. And what you can do for that is to use different locations, as it's called in Flyway speak. It's just different sources from which the migrations are being used, and you can then configure these locations based on your environment. So if you're in production, you only want, for example, the locations that contain your structure of your database, and if you are in test, you do want the same locations as production, and on top of that, you do want some more that will then populate test data for you. So that's a way to tackle that. Whether or not it's the best way to deal with test data in your environment, that's something I'll leave open. But it's certainly one way that this can be done. And I think the big help certainly is just getting the structure of your test database up and running in no time.
Right. Awesome. I think this has been really, really useful. I'm going to go back to the face here, and I'm going to stop sharing my screen so that we can see our lovely faces. All right, there we go. No, I think, Axel, this has been really awesome. I know we have been waiting for this for a while. This will be really useful, and I plan to try out Flyway myself. And I played around with it a little bit for simple database migrations, but I love that model, where it is add, inject, Flyway is available, do the migration, and kind of play around with it a little bit, and hopefully churn out a blog on that. But this recording would be available anyway on the Voxed channel, and I will share it with the audience. Thank you so much.
No, that sounds fantastic. Thank you very much for hosting the Hangout, Arun.
You're welcome. So I'm going to stop the broadcast first.